Wyoming Territory, July 1881. The morning sun beat down on the cracked earth of the high plains, and as the wind slid low through the cottonwoods, Zadie Allen stepped down from the freight wagon in front of the old homestead, with a rifle slung over one shoulder and two children clinging to her threadbare skirts. The land was hers now, or what was left of it. "Stay close, Hazel. Hold your brother's hand," she said, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on the weather-worn porch ahead. The girl, barely 8, nodded and tightened her grip on the smaller boy's fingers. Henry was 4, quiet as always, his face pale under the wide-brimmed hat much too large for him. The place looked worse than she remembered. The roof sagged over the main room. The barn leaned like a drunk against the wind. And past his lies, the yelling, the bruises still clung to the house like smoke. Zadie didn't flinch. She had buried her husband 6 weeks ago in Nebraska, a man who left more scars than memories. But she'd promised herself and her children that things would be different now. She would work the land, raise the children, and never again rely on a man for anything. She just hadn't expected him to be standing there when she arrived. He stepped out from the barn, brushing hay off his shirt, tall and sun-browned, with a bent-down hat shading his eyes. His hands were thick with calluses, his boots covered in dust. But his face, she knew it too well. "Zadie." His voice cracked a little. She blinked hard. "Rhett Talbot." He took a slow step toward her, eyes flicking to the children behind her. "Heard you were coming. Sheriff passed word. Said the Allen widow was headed for her daddy's land." "Do not call me that," she said sharply. He stopped, quiet for a breath. "Zadie, I did not know he passed. It does not matter. I did not come here for sympathy. Or for you." The kids shifted behind her. Hazel peeked out from under Zadie's arm, studying Rhett with the wide suspicion of a child who had already learned to fear men. Zadie knelt beside them. "Go inside. See if the kitchen's still standing. I will be there soon." Hazel led Henry through the door. Zadie stood up and faced Rhett again. He looked older than she remembered. Not in a bad way, just real. His jaw carried the weight of years, and his eyes held something deeper now. Not just the boy from her youth, the rancher's son who once handed her wildflowers and promised her the moon. That boy had disappeared the day she left. "I was not expecting you," she said. "I work the Talbot spread now. My father passed last spring. The land borders yours down by the creek." She nodded. "So you knew I was coming." "I did, and I thought maybe you might need a hand, at least to get started." "I do not need saving." "I did not say you did." They stood in silence, the wind moving between them. She adjusted the rifle on her shoulder. "I will work the land. But do not expect love, Rhett." Something in his face shifted, hurt, maybe, or just years of feelings packed too tight. Still, he nodded. "I will wait anyway." Zadie turned without answering, walking toward the house. But his words followed her, quiet and steady like a promise. The first 2 weeks passed in sweat and silence. Zadie repaired the front roof herself, patched the chicken coop, and cleared the field for planting. Rhett showed up at dawn, left at dusk, never asked questions. Just worked hauling lumber, mending fences, teaching Hazel how to check for rattlers in the tall grass. She kept her distance. She had to. Her children needed stability, not dreams. Love had failed her once. It would not be given a chance to fail her again. One evening, after the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of rust, Zadie stepped out from the house to find Rhett chopping wood behind the barn. Sweat streaked his shirt. His hands moved with quiet rhythm, not for show, just doing the work. "Why are you still here?" she asked. He paused, set the axe down. "Because you are." She frowned. "You could work your own land." "I do. Then I come here." She crossed her arms. "You think I owe you something for that?" "No," he looked at her, eyes steady. "I just never stopped caring." She swallowed hard. Hazel's voice broke the moment. "Mama, Henry's stuck." She turned fast. "Where is he?" "By the well." "He was chasing a frog. He is stuck between the boards." Zadie ran, heart pounding, Rhett on her heels. The old well sat behind the house. Its frame collapsed years ago. The boards covering it had shifted. She saw Henry's small body lodged between 2 planks, crying softly, his leg caught. She dropped to her knees. "Henry, do not move." Rhett moved faster. In one motion, he knelt beside her, braced himself, and pulled the boards apart just enough for Zadie to reach in and grab Henry's arm. She pulled him out, cradling him tight, her heart thundering. He was safe. a bruise on his shin, but safe. She looked up at Rhett. Thank you. He nodded, breathless. Anytime. She stood, holding her son tight. Hazel hovered nearby, eyes full of worry. Zadie knelt and pulled both children into her arms. That night, after the children slept, she stepped outside to find Rhett sitting on the porch, watching the stars. She sat beside him, her voice low. I did not think Henry would be safe here. I did not think I could do this. You are doing it. She looked at him. You keep showing up. What? Because I meant what I said. I will wait, Zadie. As long as it takes. She did not answer. But she did not leave either. And he stayed, beside her, quiet and still, until the sun rose again. The wind shifted in late August, bringing cooler nights and the slow promise of harvest. Zadie stood in the garden with her skirts damp to the knee, hands deep in soil warmed by the long day's sun. Her fingernails had long since stained with dirt, and her back ached steady, but it was the kind of pain that meant something was growing. Rhett was down by the edge of the property, driving corner posts for a new fence. She could hear the faint rhythm of his hammer through the hush of the evening. Hazel and Henry were inside, dipping apples and molasses under the watch of an older widow named Mrs. Loring, who came by once a week to help with sewing and keep watch when Zadie worked the far end of the land. She brushed a curl from her cheek and straightened, eyes tracking the horizon. The homestead had begun to shift not in shape, but in feeling. The silence no longer pressed against her, and the house had taken on a softened look, as if it had begun to trust her back. She walked down the slope where the fence was going in. Rhett didn't look up when she approached, just drove another post into the earth with a steady swing. You know that line's too far east, she said. He paused and leaned on the post. Surveyor marked it last spring. I checked again last week. Creek changed course some. It still runs clean through both our lands, but the borders moved. She looked down at the new post, then up at him. You didn't mention it. You had your hands full. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. I figured I'd build it to the new line, and if you didn't like it, we could move it later. I don't like surprises. Noted. He met her eyes. But I didn't think you'd like a fight with the county assessor either. She didn't answer. Instead, she took the hammer from where it leaned against a rock and drove the next post in herself. The sound rang clean, and Rhett stepped back as she worked. When she finished, she handed it back to him. I'll keep watch on Creek Drift. If it changes again, I'll mark it myself. He nodded. Fair. They stood at the edge of the land, watching the sun fall behind the cottonwoods. Dust hung in the air like old lace. Rhett pulled a tin from his pocket and offered her a piece of dried peach. She hesitated, then took it. You remember that summer we built the corral behind your father's barn? He asked. I remember you dropped a beam on your foot and wouldn't admit it was broken. I couldn't let you outlift me. She chewed slowly. You were 17. I was already halfway smarter. He laughed, a quiet breath through his nose. You always were. Zadie looked down at the earth between them. I never wanted to come back here, she said. I know, but I didn't have a choice. I know that too. She turned toward the house. The windows glowed warm, and Hazel's laughter floated faint on the wind. I'm not the same person I was, she said. You think I am? She looked at him, hard. I think you still want things you shouldn't. He drew in a breath, slow. I want things I'm willing to wait for. That's not the same. She didn't tell him to stop, but she didn't answer, either. That night, she sat at the kitchen table sewing patches to Henry's trousers while the children slept in the loft above. Mrs. Loring had gone home before sunset, her boots crunching down the long path toward town, and the house held a hush that felt almost holy. She heard a knock on the doorframe. Rhett stood there, hat in hand. I found something, he said. By the old well. She pushed back from the table and stepped outside with him. The moon lit the yard in pale silver. He crouched beside the stone ring near the barn and held up a small bent horseshoe. It's Hazel's, she said. She hangs them in trees. It caught in the boards, he said. Could have stepped wrong, missed the edge. She's careful. I know she is, he said. But this place, it's full of old breaks. You're mending what you can. But there's more to fix than one person should carry alone. She didn't look at him. Instead, she reached for the horseshoe and turned it over in her hand. You're not asking for anything, she said. No, but you're hoping I want to give it anyway. He didn't speak. She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. You should go home for tonight. He nodded once. I'll be by at first light. She held the horseshoe tighter as he left, the iron cool in her hand. The wind stirred the grass, and the land around her breathed like something waking. By mid-September, the mornings came sharp with frost. Zadie lit the kitchen stove before the children woke, feeding it pine, kindling, and careful, split logs from the stack Rhett had built behind the house. She moved through the kitchen by lantern light, sleeves rolled high, hair tied back with a strip of worn muslin. Outside, the first hush of winter stirred the edges of the grass. Rhett arrived before dawn, same as always, but that morning he brought something different, a milk cow, roped and reluctant, trailing behind his sorrel gelding. Zadie stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. That cow won't stay. She might, if you let her see the barn before you decide. I didn't ask for livestock. I know. Your boy needs milk, and the general store's charging near double since the stage stopped running regular. She pressed her lips together. And what do you want in return? Nothing. She calves in the spring. Keep her if you like. If not, I'll take her back then. Zadie looked past him to the fence line, where frost clung to the rails like lace. The cow snorted, impatient. Put her in the back stall, she said, and check her hooves. That left rear's dragging. Rhett gave a short nod and led the animal around the side. Later that morning, Zadie found herself kneeling in the barn with a bucket of warm water, rinsing the cow's legs. Hazel crouched nearby, watching closely while Henry napped on a folded quilt just inside the door. She's got a sore, Zadie murmured. Hazel tilted her head. Will it heal? If we keep it clean and let her rest, it will. The girl didn't answer, but her hand reached out, slow and careful, to rest on the cow's flank. Zadie glanced toward the open doors. Rhett stood just outside, leaning against the frame, not speaking. You're not staying for supper, Zadie said without looking up. I didn't plan to. Good. It's lentils and what's left of the carrots. Nothing worth lingering for. I didn't come for food. I know. He turned to leave, but paused. There's a fall dance in town next week. Grange Hall. Might be music. I won't be there. I figured. She rose, wiping her hands on her apron. Then why'd you bring it up? Hazel might want to go. If she's never seen a dance, she ought to. Zadie's jaw tightened. That's not your place. No, he said simply. But it's hers. That night, after the children slept and the wind curled low around the eaves, Zadie stepped outside with a blanket draped over her shoulders. She walked beyond the barn, past the garden now going to seed, and stood at the edge of the field where the wheat had failed. She looked out over the land, raw still, stubborn and unyielding in places, but hers. She heard footsteps behind her. You shouldn't be here this late, she said. I saw your lamp was still burning. I'm not your responsibility. I never said you were. She turned to face him, the moon catching faint silver in his hair. You keep giving. Cows. Fences. Time. What? Because I've got more to offer than I used to. And because I remember who you were before he broke things. That woman's gone. I don't think so. He took a step closer. I think she's just buried under too many hard winters. Zadie looked away, arms tightening around herself. I can't give anything back, Rhett. Not now. Maybe not ever. I'm not asking for anything today. You think I'll change. I think you already are. She felt it then, not anger, not sorrow, but something quieter. Like thaw. Like the first trickle of spring under a crust of snow. She swallowed hard. I don't know if I can love again. I'll wait anyway. The words hung between them. Not heavy, just true. She didn't move toward him, but she didn't turn away either. When the wind carried the first snow the following morning, the cow stayed in the stall. Hazel milked her without flinching, and Rhett arrived with a bundle of dried apples and a box of nails wrapped in canvas. Zadie opened the door before he knocked. The first hard snow came down in October, thick, wet flakes that clung to the window panes and muted the sound of the world. Zadie watched it fall from inside, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders as she kneaded dough on the kitchen table. Hazel read aloud from a tattered reader by the fire, her voice steady and careful, while Henry built a crooked fort from kindling sticks under the bench. Out beyond the frost-glazed panes, the wind moved low and constant through the white. Rhett had not come that morning. She hadn't expected him. The weather made travel near impossible unless you had urgent cause. Still, she caught herself glancing toward the barn more than once. She cut the dough into rounds and set them on the wood stove's warming shelf. The silence in the house had grown fuller over the weeks, not the kind that pressed against the ribs, but the kind that let you breathe deeper. She didn't trust it yet, not entirely, but she'd stopped bracing for the sharp edge that used to follow it. Hazel stopped reading. Mama, what happens if the cow has her calf too early? She won't. But if she does, we'll do what we can. I helped my father birth colts and goats. It's not so different. Hazel nodded, satisfied. The knock came just after dusk, quiet and deliberate. Zadie opened the door to find Rhett with snow crusted on the brim of his hat, a canvas sack over one shoulder, and a pair of gloves stiff with cold. There's a tree down across your west fence. Elk must have rushed it this morning. You walked through that for a tree? I brought a saw in line. Figured if I didn't, the cattle might wander come thaw. She stepped aside. You'll freeze if you stay out. He entered without speaking, stamping snow from his boots. Henry ran to him without hesitation now, tugging on the hem of Rhett's coat. Rhett crouched to hand him a small wooden horse, carved rough but sturdy. It's not finished, Rhett said. Still needs sanding. Henry clutched it tight and nodded solemnly, as if he understood the gravity of an unfinished gift. Zadie stirred coals in the stovebox. You didn't need to bring anything. I know. She ladled stew into a clay bowl and set it in front of him without ceremony. Eat before it cools. He removed his coat, hung it by the door, and sat. The children drifted upstairs with books and the carved horse, leaving Zadie and Rhett with only the sound of the fire and the soft scrape of spoon against bowl. When's the last time you were in town? He asked. Not since the freight wagon. There's word going around. Some men from back east bought up the old mining contracts near Granite Ridge, talking about blasting again come spring. She frowned. That land stripped bare. Doesn't stop greed. She leaned back against the counter, arms folded. If they try to run track through here, I'll fight them. I know you will. I came to warn you. She studied him. You always seem to know things before I do. I listen. To who? Everyone. Folks talk more than they realize. She hesitated, then crossed to the table and sat across from him. What else have you heard? He set the spoon down. That people are watching. Watching what? You. This place. How you've kept it. Some say it's foolish you stayed. But most say it's the first time the Allen lands looked alive in years. She looked down at her hands, calloused, cracked, strong. None of that changes what I told you, she said. I didn't come expecting change. You always say that. Because it's always true. She ran a thumb along the edge of the table. There's something I've been meaning to ask. All right. That day you came from the barn. When I first got here, why'd you look like you'd seen a ghost? He met her gaze. Because it felt like I had. I never thought I'd see you on this land again. You thought I'd vanish. I thought you were gone for good. When you wrote once, just once to say you'd married and moved east, I figured that was the end of it. I didn't think you'd still be here. I didn't expect to be. She nodded once, slowly. The man I married. He wasn't kind. I know. She looked at him, eyes sharp. How? He didn't flinch. Hazel flinched the first few times I raised my hand to scratch my neck. You never told her to. She learned it. Zadie sat still for a long time. Then, you're the only man she doesn't hide from. I'd never harm her. I believe that now. He stood slowly, not reaching for her, not pressing. I'll come back when the snow lifts. Check the south line. She rose too. Rhett. He paused in the doorway. She moved toward him, one step, then another. Close enough to see the snow melting at his collar's edge. If I did ask you to stay. Not just for supper, but longer. What then? I'd stay. You wouldn't ask me for anything? No. Zadie looked up at him for a long, silent moment. I still don't know if I'm ready. I'm still willing to wait. She nodded once, a slow breath leaving her chest. Then maybe. You don't have to wait outside anymore. He didn't answer. Just stepped inside again, quiet as snowfall. The thaw came late. By the second week of March, the snow had begun to retreat from the edges of the field, revealing damp earth beneath and fence posts half sunk in mud. The roof carried the weight of the melt in slow drips, and Zadie woke most mornings to the creak of water sliding through the eaves. She stood on the back porch with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, wringing out cloths for the windows. Inside, Hazel was tutoring Henry with quiet patience, her pencil tapping as she counted aloud, and the cow lowed softly from the barn, heavy with spring's promise. Rhett had moved into the spare room above the root cellar 2 weeks earlier, after Zadie asked him without ceremony. There'd been no conversation about permanence, but he'd hung his coat on a peg beside hers and built a cedar box for Henry's carved animals without being asked. Most mornings, he rose before dawn to chop wood or check the lines, and in the evenings, he read aloud from a worn volume of folk tales while the children listened from the hearth rug. That morning, Zadie found him in the shed behind the barn, oiling the hinges of a wooden crate. "You planning to ship something?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. He shook his head. "Thought I'd build shelves for your jars. That way you don't have to stack them under the bed come harvest." She stepped inside, arms crossed. "You've been quiet lately. I figured you needed time." "For what?" "To decide if you want this." She took a step closer. "Would I be here if I didn't?" "I don't take that for granted." "I know you don't." She watched him, the way his fingers moved steady around the cloth and hinge, the way his eyes didn't rush to hers. "I've made up my mind." He set the cloth down. "I want you to stay," she said. "Not just for spring. Not just for the field. I want you here at my table. With my children. In my bed. Under my name." He looked at her, and something unreadable passed over his face like a man trying not to hope too fast. "Are you sure? I won't ever be the girl you knew. But I'm not afraid of loving you now." He crossed the space between them, slow, and reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. His palm was warm, rough, familiar. She stepped into him, her head resting against his chest, and he held her like he meant to keep her there. Later that week, when the sky cleared and the ground firmed, they rode into town together. Hazel sat tall on her pony beside Henry, who clutched the saddle horn with both hands and wore Rhett's old handkerchief around his neck like a badge. At the church, Zadie kept her voice low when she spoke her vows. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But she held Rhett's hand in both of hers, and when he kissed her, it was quiet and sure and full of the kind of promise that didn't need saying aloud. Mrs. Loring baked a sweet cake with dried currants and boiled sugar glaze. The children danced in the schoolhouse with the neighbor girls, and someone played fiddle until dusk. No one asked questions. No one whispered. The past didn't follow them there. Back at the homestead, Rhett carried her across the threshold as the children giggled from the loft. She protested, half laughing, but he didn't let go until he'd set her down by the warm stove. That night, she lay beside him in the bed she once slept in alone, her fingers tracing the calluses on his knuckles, and he whispered something about summer corn and a second milk cow, but she didn't answer. She was smiling, pressed against him, already half asleep. Years passed, slow and full. Hazel grew tall and took to writing letters for neighbors who couldn't hold a pen. Henry tended the garden and told stories to the chicks, the way his father used to murmur to the oxen back in Nebraska. Zadie bore one more child, a daughter with Rhett's eyes and her mother's quiet mouth, on a spring morning when the peach tree bloomed behind the barn. They built a new shed, expanded the coop. The land gave more than it had in decades. Zadie never left the porch without a purpose, never went to bed without touching Rhett's arm, and never once told her daughter that love was about promises. Instead, she showed her with every day, every fence post, every jar of peaches sealed for winter. And when the wind came down from the mountains and rattled the windows in January, she never flinched. She was never alone again.